Hi friends, my name is Brian and today I will tell you another heartbreaking story. At first glance, it looked like a success story, the kind people love to believe in, where two ordinary lives cross paths and seem to lift each other towards something better. This is how the story of Jodi Arias and Travis Alexander often begins, wrapped in optimism, faith, and the promise of personal transformation, long before it became one of the most disturbing true crime cases in modern American history. Travis Alexander was the kind of man who drew people in effortlessly. He was charismatic, articulate, and deeply committed to the beliefs that shaped his life. As a motivational speaker and salesman, he spoke often about discipline, success, and becoming the best version of oneself. Friends described him as generous and inspiring, someone who genuinely believed that life had a higher purpose. His faith mattered deeply to him, and he envisioned a future built on shared values, ambition, and spiritual growth. Jodi Arias, by contrast, seemed uncertain about who she was and where she was going. She was creative, artistic, and soft-spoken, but also restless. Those who knew her described a young woman searching for direction, craving validation, and longing to be truly seen. When she met Travis, she didn't just see a romantic partner. She saw someone who appeared to have all the answers she lacked. They met in 2006 at a business conference in Las Vegas, a setting filled with high energy, optimism, and talk of self-improvement. The connection between them was immediate. Travis took on the role of mentor as much as boyfriend, encouraging Jodi to think bigger, aim higher, and reshape her life. For Jodi, his approval became incredibly important. His attention felt like guidance, purpose, and love, all wrapped into one. One of the most striking early decisions Jodi made was converting to Mormonism, the faith Travis followed devoutly. At the time, it was presented as a gesture of commitment and devotion, proof that she was serious about him and the life he represented. But looking back, many see it differently. The conversion symbolized how deeply Jodi was willing to change herself to fit into Travis's world, even if it meant abandoning parts of her own identity. From the outside, their relationship looked passionate and intense, but beneath the surface, it was already unstable. Their bond burned quickly and unevenly, driven by emotional extremes rather than balance. Travis maintained control over the direction of the relationship, while Jodi became increasingly attached, emotionally dependent, and fearful of losing him. Even in these early stages, the warning signs were there. The intensity that felt like love also carried the seeds of obsession. Admiration began to blur into fixation. Guidance began to resemble control. What seemed like a perfect beginning was, in reality, a fragile foundation built on imbalance, unmet needs, and emotional volatility. This was not a story of two people growing together. It was the story of one person elevating another to an almost mythic status and slowly disappearing in the process. And while nothing about those early days suggested how violently it would end, the cracks were already forming, hidden beneath devotion, charm, and the illusion of a perfect beginning. Although Travis Alexander and Jodi Arias officially broke up in 2007, the relationship did not end in any meaningful way. On paper, they were no longer a couple, but emotionally, physically, and psychologically, they remained tightly bound to each other. What followed was not a clean separation, but a confusing and dangerous limbo, where boundaries were blurred and expectations were painfully mismatched. They continued seeing each other in secret, often behind the scenes of Travis's public life. They continued being intimate, maintaining a physical connection that kept hope alive for one of them while reinforcing control for the other. Yet Travis was firm about one thing. Despite the intimacy, despite the emotional history, Jodi was not the woman he intended to marry. He wanted a future that aligned with his religious ideals and public image, and in his mind, that future did not include her. Travis made it clear that he wanted to move on. He wanted to date other women, to meet someone new, someone he believed would be more suitable as a long-term partner. For Jodi, this reality was crushing. What she experienced was not just a breakup, but a profound rejection that struck at the core of her identity. Travis had become the center of her emotional world, the source of validation, purpose, and belonging. Being told she was not the one felt like being erased. As Travis attempted to create distance, Jodi responded by closing in. She moved closer to him geographically, shrinking the physical space between them as emotional distance grew. She paid close attention to his online presence, monitoring his social media activity and interactions. The line between interest and surveillance began to disappear. Her behavior grew increasingly possessive, driven by fear rather than love. Friends and acquaintances later said that Travis had begun to feel uneasy. He spoke openly about being stalked. He mentioned tires being slashed. He complained that his online accounts had been hacked. What once felt like passion now felt intrusive, even threatening. Those close to him noticed a shift in his tone when he talked about Jody. There was nervousness there, and a sense that he could not fully escape her presence. To Travis, Jody came to represent a chapter of his life he wanted to close. She was the past, a relationship he viewed as complicated, secretive, and increasingly problematic. To Jody, however, Travis was not simply a former boyfriend. He was everything. He was the person she had reshaped her life for, the man whose approval she chased, the future she had imagined in vivid detail. The imbalance between them widened with every interaction. Travis held the power to decide when they spoke, when they met, and when they were intimate. Jody lived in a constant state of emotional uncertainty, oscillating between hope and despair. This imbalance created a volatile dynamic where control, jealousy, and desperation fed into one another. What appeared to be a mutual inability to let go was, in reality, a one-sided attachment growing darker by the day. The more Travis tried to pull away, the more Jody clung to what remained. And as the emotional tension intensified, the risk increased. This was no longer a relationship stuck in the past. It was a dangerous emotional entanglement moving steadily toward a breaking point where obsession replaced love and rejection began to feel unbearable. June 4th, 2008 did not begin like a murder scene, and that is part of what makes the final hours of Travis Alexander so unsettling, because nothing about that day suggested it would end in one of the most brutal killings in modern true crime history. Photographs later recovered would show Travis alive and relaxed, smiling into the camera, standing casually in his bathroom, unaware that these images would become a silent countdown to his death. They were intimate, ordinary moments, the kind people capture without thinking twice, never imagining they might be the last record of their life. At some point that afternoon, the tone of the day shifted violently and without warning. What followed was not a sudden act of rage, but a prolonged, chaotic attack that unfolded over minutes, not seconds. Travis Alexander was stabbed more than 20 times. The wounds spread across his body in a frenzy that suggested desperation and fury rather than impulse. His throat was slashed so deeply that medical examiners would later describe it as nearly reaching the spine, a wound that alone could have been fatal. Yet it was not the end. He was also shot in the head, a final, devastating injury that marked the moment his life ended. Experts would testify that this was not a quick or merciful death. Defensive wounds on his hands and arms told a story of resistance, of a man who understood he was under attack and fought desperately to survive. He was conscious during much of the assault. He felt pain. He experienced fear. He knew, on some level, that he was dying in his own home. The bathroom, a place associated with privacy and routine, became the setting of unimaginable violence. Blood evidence later revealed a struggle that moved through the space, ending in the shower where his body would eventually be found. After the attack, silence returned to the house, broken only by the slow passage of time. Travis's body remained undiscovered for days, locked behind closed doors as decomposition set in, altering the scene and masking the horror within. Friends grew concerned when he failed to show up for scheduled plans, a behavior completely out of character for him. When they finally entered the house, what they found was a scene that would haunt investigators and jurors alike. Yet perhaps the most chilling detail emerged not from the body itself, but from a small, damaged digital camera recovered at the scene. Hidden, partially destroyed, and soaked with water, it still contained images that documented the final moments of Travis's life. The photos showed him alive, then injured, then slumped and bleeding, a visual timeline of a murder in progress. There was no need for speculation or reconstruction. The camera had captured the truth frame by frame. During interrogation, her first version was calm and dismissive. She claimed she had not seen Travis in months, insisting their relationship was long over and that she had no reason to be anywhere near his home. It was a clean story, simple and distant, designed to remove her entirely from the crime. But investigators were already uneasy. Phone records, emails, and witness statements suggested something far more complicated. When that story began to crumble, Jody shifted. Her second version was darker, more dramatic. She claimed that masked intruders had broken into the house, attacking both her and Travis, and that she had barely escaped with her life. It was a story pulled straight from a thriller, complete with faceless villains and chaos, yet it collapsed under even basic scrutiny. There were no signs of forced entry, no evidence of unknown assailants, no footprints, no missing valuables. The crime scene did not speak of strangers. It spoke of intimacy. Then came the third and final version, the one that would dominate the courtroom for years. Jody Arias claimed she killed Travis Alexander in self-defense, saying he had attacked her and that she feared for her life. This time, she admitted being there, admitted the killing, but reframed herself as the victim. The problem was that the physical evidence refused to cooperate with her words. Investigators followed a trail that pointed not to panic, but to planning. In the days leading up to the murder, Jody made gasoline purchases across multiple states, paying partly in cash, a detail that immediately raised red flags. She rented a car and drove nearly 3,000 miles, a journey that made no sense for a casual visit. When the rental car was returned, key pieces of evidence were missing, including floor mats that could have carried blood or trace material. At the crime scene, bloody fingerprints were discovered, containing a mixture of both Travis's and Jody's DNA, placed in locations that suggested movement after the attack, not frantic defense. Each piece alone was troubling. Together, they formed a pattern. But nothing damaged her credibility more than the photographs. Recovered from a damaged digital camera hidden in the washing machine, the images were time-stamped and merciless. They showed Travis alive and unaware just minutes before the attack, then injured, bleeding, collapsing. There was no gap for mysterious intruders, no space for a sudden fight that spiraled out of control. The camera documented a sequence of events that aligned perfectly with the forensic evidence and completely contradicted Jody's shifting accounts. Investigators concluded that this was not an act of fear or desperation. It was preparation followed by execution. Every lie told under questioning only sharpened the truth revealed by the evidence. By the time the investigation was complete, the mask Jody Arias had worn for years was slipping, and beneath it was a story far more disturbing than any version she had tried to tell. From the very beginning, the trial was unlike most murder cases. It was televised. It was dissected online in real time. And at its center sat a defendant who seemed to understand, perhaps better than anyone else in the room, that she was being watched. Jody Arias took the stand and remained there for 18 days, an extraordinary length of time that alone raised eyebrows. Defendants rarely testify at all, let alone for weeks. She spoke in a measured, almost soothing tone, carefully choosing her words, presenting herself as thoughtful and reflective. At times, she wept softly. At other moments, she appeared composed, even detached as she described violence, fear, and trauma. She told the jury about emotional abuse, about moments when she claimed Travis Alexander had terrified her, humiliated her, and reduced her to someone trapped in a cycle of control. The picture she painted was of a woman pushed beyond endurance, reacting in a moment of desperate self-preservation. But as the days passed, something began to feel off. Jurors later said it was not any single statement that unsettled them, but the accumulation of inconsistencies. Her stories shifted subtly from one retelling to the next. Details changed, timelines blurred, emotions appeared and disappeared on cue. When confronted with physical evidence that contradicted her claims, she did not falter. She adapted. To some, it looked like resilience. To others, it looked like performance. The prosecution seized on this, arguing that Jody Arias was not a frightened victim, but a skilled manipulator, someone who believed she could outtalk science, forensics, and common sense. Expert witnesses took the stand, and the courtroom became a battleground of psychology. One side suggested she suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder shaped by past abuse and driven into a dissociative state during the killing. The other side argued for personality disorders marked by narcissism, obsession, and a profound need for control. The jury listened as diagnoses were debated like chess moves, each expert confident, each interpretation plausible on the surface. Yet the physical evidence never changed. The number of stab wounds, the gunshot, the sequence captured by the camera, the deliberate actions before and after the killing. No psychological explanation could erase those facts. As the trial dragged on, public opinion hardened. Commentators dissected her facial expressions. Body language experts weighed in. The spectacle grew so large that it sometimes threatened to overshadow the victim himself. But inside the jury room, away from cameras and commentary, the focus narrowed to one essential question: intent. When deliberations ended, the verdict was clear. This was not manslaughter. It was not self-defense. It was first-degree murder. The jury had seen through the shifting narratives and emotional displays. Whatever story Jodi Arias believed she was telling, the evidence told another. In the end, the performance that had captivated millions failed to convince the 12 people who mattered most. In 2013, after years of investigation, testimony, and public scrutiny, Jodi Arias was found guilty of first-degree murder for the killing of Travis Alexander. The verdict itself brought a sense of resolution, yet it did not bring peace. What followed was another prolonged and emotionally charged phase of the case, the sentencing. Prosecutors sought the death penalty, arguing that the murder was especially cruel and premeditated, while the defense pushed back, emphasizing Jodi's mental state and history of alleged abuse. The jury could not reach a unanimous decision on execution, and the question of death versus life dragged on through appeals and additional hearings. Ultimately, the court imposed a sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole, ensuring that Jodi Arias would never walk free again. For many, this felt like justice. For others, it felt incomplete. But regardless of where opinions landed, the legal outcome did not signal the end of the story. Instead, the case embedded itself deep into popular culture. Documentaries, books, podcasts, and endless online discussions kept the narrative alive. The name Jodi Arias became shorthand for a particular kind of crime, one rooted not in robbery or impulse, but in obsession. It forced the public to confront uncomfortable questions about how love can curdle into control and how warning signs are often dismissed until it is too late. This was not a story of a stranger breaking into a home, but of intimacy turning poisonous behind closed doors. The case also sparked intense debate about victimhood and responsibility. Some saw Jodi Arias as a manipulative figure who weaponized vulnerability and psychology to excuse violence. Others, even years later, continued to argue that the dynamics of the relationship were more complex, pointing to power imbalances and emotional cruelty. That tension, unresolved and deeply personal, is one reason the case refuses to fade. It sits at the intersection of true crime, psychology, and cultural identity, forcing audiences to wrestle with the idea that a person can be both wounded and dangerous. Travis Alexander's death also became part of the legacy, though too often overshadowed by the spectacle of the trial. He was remembered by friends and family as ambitious, flawed, generous, and deeply human, not just a victim frozen in evidence photos. His life and death became a reminder of how private relationships can carry public consequences. Ultimately, the story of Jodi Arias is not just about a verdict or a prison sentence. It is about what happens when rejection is interpreted as betrayal, when identity becomes fused to another person, and when letting go feels more terrifying than destruction. Thank you for watching this video until the end. If this story made you think, disturbed you, or stayed with you longer than expected, don't forget to support the channel. Subscribe for more true crime stories, leave a like, and share your thoughts in the comments. Your support helps keep these stories alive and remembered.